Hello, thanks for joining me today. My name is Amanda Savage. I'm Head of Education for TACT Care. Some of you may have joined me on some of the previous Q&A where we type questions. This one's got the added feature of you're going to be able to see and hear me. I'm going to be presenting on the second school closure. So I'll be talking to a few slides, but please feel free to post any questions you may have. So this is entitled The Second School Closure, What You Need to Know and How to Support Home Learning. Hope this information will be useful to you. Okay, so thanks for joining. Please post any questions in the comments area below. So with the fantastic technical support I have from Ben Shaw, will be able to see your questions. I'll stop the presentation probably at the end of each slide to answer any questions you may have that might crop up. In the meantime, I'll be talking to the slides that I've prepared. So it'd be great to hear from you. Just want to say a big welcome if we have carers in Wales. I know my colleague presented some training for you this morning. I hope that was useful. To carers in Scotland, also know that you have your challenges with school closure as well, the same as with England. And carers to say that actually you're probably having a really challenging time at the moment. So just to say that TACT colleagues and myself and the staff are here to support you in any way. And as Head of Education, the Education Service is here to help with any education issues that may arise during this really challenging time. So just to recap, the aims of TACT's Education Service, because when I have a forum such as this, it's great to reach out to carers who may not know so much about the Education Service, and just to reiterate that we're here to help. I've been in post since April 2019, so I'm really lucky to be approaching the second anniversary of leading a brand new Education Service for TACT. So just as there are local authority teams, virtual schools and your local authority social workers to help with education issues, this is to provide support for our own carers. Some of you will contact the Education Service direct and there will be information coming up. You may see my phone number on the bottom of the screen along with my email address, and there'll also be a slide at the end to give the contact details of myself and the Education Support Administrator Laura. And some of you will make contact with me through raising education issues with your supervisors and social workers in your daily conversations or in your supervisions, and they may refer to the Education Service to ask for consultation, representation at meetings, or any supportive advice that may crop up. So my preoccupations when I came in post were to ensure that our young people weren't permanently excluded from school. We know children in care are more likely to be excluded and they're a vulnerable group. So the government advises that schools do not follow that line. But unfortunately, when I came in post, there were many young people who were permanently excluded. And I'm really happy to say that 2 years down the line, we're very successful in averting those exclusions, in finding alternatives, such as a move of a school or an alternative provision, and ensuring our young people receive the very best quality of education that they can. So reducing permanent exclusions to zero and averting them is a major preoccupation. And then moving the attention on to reducing fixed term exclusions. Some of these may be unofficial when children are off-rolled from school. Some of these may be official exclusions where young people are missing time off of school or sent to isolation units. And we're seeing a decrease in those through early intervention. When young people are placed new, we all know it takes a little bit of time for them to be offered an appropriate school. And so the Education Service can liaise with the virtual schools, the local authorities, just to help push things along and to ensure that young people are receiving the very best education that they can. Had great success this year, particularly during lockdown. In one way, it's worked to our favour in terms of securing education healthcare plans. So there's something that takes schools a really long time to apply for, and we've had a lot of kickback from schools saying that they would feel the young person wouldn't meet the criteria. But by working with foster carers, supervisors and social workers, and gaining the permission of the local authority, had great success securing many education healthcare plans for young people using our entitlement of parental request. Some of these young people will move on to a specialist setting, and then the work, once the plan and the funding has been agreed, is to secure the right school for the young person. I can think of many carers where I'm supporting them through that process currently. Education is a long, slow, and often highly bureaucratic system. And that's because government money needs to be thought about really carefully. School places, particularly in the independent sector, can be very expensive. And so decision making can take a really long time because they just need to be robust decisions. But occasionally things can grind to a bit of a halt and carers can be the last to know. And the Education Service aims to ensure that we do a lot of the footwork on your behalf. Can send emails out to virtual schools, local authorities to find out what the situation is with SEN departments as well, admissions departments, and ensure that your young people, if they are placed with you and they're out of education, or if they need a change of school placement, that everything becomes much speedier. Some of our young people, as I've mentioned before, mainstream school isn't right for everybody, and it takes a really long time to secure a specialist setting. So sometimes our young people need to go to alternative provisions for a period of time, such as forest schools. I have some young people really having a great time at the moment working with animals, hairdressing. There's a variety of alternative provisions available nowadays. These are costly again. It takes a lot of negotiation with virtual schools to agree funding, sometimes out of the pupil premium grant, especially particularly if SEN funding isn't in place. And these are often what I would call education bridging placements. Young people tend not to stay in them long term, but it can be a positive short-term solution between their permanent school and finding a new school. Starting to really work hard to gather the PEPs and ensure that they're saved on charms, that you as carers are invited to PEPs. A lot of work's been happening around that in Wales at the moment. Sorry to Scotland because PEPs are not relevant for yourselves, but in England, there are meetings that happen 3 times a year, and it's really important carers are at them. And it's so important for us as TACT that we have the minutes saved on our system. So since the Education Support Administrator, Laura Brown's been in post, we've been working really hard to ensure that we meet our target of at least 80% PEP saved on charms, and work, of course, to getting to that 100%. And then we'll move towards monitoring the quality of the PEPs and ensuring the pupil premium is used in the best way. And with school closure, it's been so important that pupil premium is tapped into. The first time the schools closed in March, I think local authorities were a little bit slow to know how to respond to that. So after the April, the new financial year, when pupil premium grant was available, many of them were much more generous, much more proactive in offering laptops to be provided or using the pupil premium funding to actually send resources to carers' homes. I can think of many carers who have had between £100 and £600 worth of resources actually delivered to their homes so they can support the learning of our young people when homeschooling. So that's something I'd like to revisit and come back to. I think I haven't had as many offers from local authorities. It is the government laptop scheme, but the first time around we were not very successful in receiving many. So here at Education Services in TACT, we've been really lucky through our fundraising team to secure a small but very useful pot of funding. It's a charitable donation, and we're able to receive requests for things like laptops if young people haven't the equipment to work from home, or books, or even sometimes desks. Anything we can do to help support you and resolve any of these logistical issues that can create a real hassle when young people are at home learning. So we're all having to swap our homes around to work in different rooms. Many of you are juggling your own work commitments or your commitment as a foster carer. Many young people in placement, sometimes birth children as well, and we're all having to adapt. So sometimes just having that piece of equipment you really need is something that is proven really useful. I had an email not long ago from a carer who said, we've asked the local authority time and time again, no laptop, my laptop's just broken, what can happen? And I was able to say, well, we have some funding, I can approve for a laptop to be sent to you. And that's just takes a little bit of the pressure off at a really challenging time. So an email went out to all child resource workers supervisors and social workers, area managers and deputy managers to make them aware. Laura Brown put a little note, which I understand on the foster care portal, just to say if you need anything, please let us know. Again, it's a small pot, so we have to be careful how we use it, but I'm looking to approve any funds and requests that are reasonable. We may have to negotiate on the type of machine, because I'm using, and I'm on one now when my work computer failed me, but a little cloud book. They're quite inexpensive and really useful to use for young people in the stopgap, because we are hoping that children will return to schools. The government's saying review February half term. I would be surprised if all schools reopen much before Easter. So we are having to get through these next few weeks and months with the resources we have. The Education Service works year round, obviously, not just during school closure. So we work to provide training for carers. I've had a lot of training I've delivered recently, quite a lot coming up. And to build, as I said, the positive relationships with virtual schools, Potential in England, LACE's team in Wales, and local authorities in Scotland. I'm actually an associate member of the National Association of Virtual School Heads, and I completed a postgraduate certificate in the education of care experienced young people. I'm currently doing an action research project towards my master's degree in the professional practice, all around the education of children in care experienced young people. And that has been a great forum to network with the local authorities, to raise the profile of TACT. We are the largest charitable fostering agency in the country. I've had quite a few meetings around getting together maybe a network of professionals for independent fostering agencies, and working hard to build those links with local authorities so that they work hand in hand with us, because it's the local authorities that have the statutory responsibility for our young people's education, but we absolutely have them in our minds, in our hearts, and we advocate so strongly for them to get the education provision that they need. Okay, so I'm just going to check every so often, see if any questions pop up, and move on to telling you a bit more about my role. So yeah, I think I've mentioned quite a bit about what we do and how you can access us. That the supervisors and social workers generally make the referrals to the Education Service. I recently had to submit some data to senior leadership team looking at the referrals we receive. And across TACT, it generally sits around 8%. Some areas it may be up as far as 20, some may be a bit lower in the 2%. But actually, this would be my turn to urge you as foster carers to know that the Education Service is here. It's here to support you in whichever way you need, particularly during the challenging time of this school closure period, and that you can either raise the education issue with your supervisor and social worker to make the referral, or you can contact us directly. Often I speak with carers in the day. I'm very happy to offer an hour's consultation. That could be just with yourselves. In one case, I've got one coming up with a supervisor and social worker as well. And for us to try to together problem solve any education issues that may arise. Outside school closure time, they generally are around behaviour policies, ensuring that our young people are supported and their traumas are not triggered. I'm actually doing quite a lot of work around trauma-informed education at the moment, and we're trying to roll out some of our own training to support our schools to be more trauma-informed. And you know, accessing the funding that I've spoken about. But within school closure time, the job becomes very different, and it is around ensuring that young people who need a vulnerable child's place are in school, and those who are you're choosing to keep at home, or the decision has been made they're going to be at home for their home learning, that you have all the resources you need, all the information you need to exercise that. So I'm going to move on a little bit more now to talk about some of those issues raised. Okay, so this is why we're here. We're here to discuss what happened on the 4th of January. Well, we know in March 2020, the schools closed. For me, as a long-term education professional, so taught in schools for 18 years, and I've worked in education for the last 24 years, I've never seen anything more than the odd school day closure for, you know, the heating system's gone down, or, you know, there's a snow day. And sometimes that can be a nice thing for young people to have the day off to play in the snow. The school's closed. They closed in March and they didn't reopen in a meaningful way for many young people until September. And I really believe that they would remain open, and I was very hopeful that they would. We know some of our young people access the vulnerable children places. It was around 45% initially was the first information I was getting within our cohort of TACT young people. But as we knew more about the offer of the vulnerable child place, after Easter, that certainly rose to more like 65%. And before September, about 80% of our young people were actually in school. It was only in September that carers lost the right to decide to keep them at home, and all children in or out of foster care had to go back to school. And so our children in the new school year in September were relearning what it meant to be at school face to face. And even if they were in a vulnerable child place, it was very different. There was a lot of childcare going on, high adult to child ratios, less emphasis on schoolwork. And when schools reopened in September, they really had a big emphasis on helping children to catch up, but also with an eye on their own statistics that they will be judged by and Ofsted on. So some of the young people were receiving very high quality interventions, and some of it was that back to that stress of the social stress of having to conform, of having in a large secondary school to negotiate their way around, or in a primary school to share with others in a class of 30. So our young people did really well, and you may have seen some of my webinars around the return to education. And then Christmas came, and we knew that things were challenging. Some colleagues say in Liverpool had the daily testing or options of regular testing, which I received. That obviously it's time costly, but that helped to make people feel a bit safer. Some of the schools, so I'm based in the southeast, in London in the southeast, started to close early. I know many of the schools in London and many academies, because they can decide a little bit more their businesses, they can make some of their own decisions, closed the week before. Most schools closed on the 18th of December. So we started to see in December that winding down to Christmas. I very much thought that schools would reopen in the new year. So in the southeast, we had quite a shock over that weekend, the New Year weekend, that we found out that some schools in some of the local authorities were not going to open. So that was 9 out of 13 districts in Kent. Then some of the London boroughs said, well, we're really close geographically. We don't feel it's safe for us to reopen, and wanted to close, whereas the government was threatening fines. And then there was the big U-turn, and for me, it really did feel like that, where the decision was made using the scientific data that all schools should remain closed. So on 8 o'clock, you may have watched it at the same time as myself, Boris Johnson announced live on the 4th of January 2021 that yes, it was the new year, but schools would not be reopening. Personally, that was quite a shock to me. I'm sure you will join me in saying that all the hopes for the new year seemed to be dashed somewhat, because suddenly we were back to having to juggle our own work commitments and homeschooling. But this is where we are. And I have to trust that those decisions are being made with best information we have from the scientists who are advising the government, and that this is the right decision. So we have to work on the fact that it is the right thing to be done. And then schools, I had the worry that what's going to happen with home learning. But I must say, I can say positively, and of course, Nicola Sturgeon also announced that Scotland would be facing another lockdown, and Wales facing very similar restrictions. So there we have all of our young people potentially out of education in the new year. But I must say, because the schools had the benefit of the closure the first time, I found very quickly, maybe the first week, last week was a very busy week for myself as head of education, but there was lots of inquiries coming in. Foster carers knew your rights better, that, the children had this right to be in school as vulnerable young people. So that was great. And many of you contacted the education service to say that you'd like to take up the school places. Some contacted us to say that, thinking about the risk to your own selves and family, that you didn't want to take up the school places. And equally, we supported you in that. and supervisors and social workers asking questions and making referrals. I must say that other than the usual flurry on a Monday morning, things seem to have settled down a lot more this week, and I would expect to see that in the weeks going ahead, where on the 8th of January, the government updated the link you can see on the screen now. They very much said something that was quite useful. They said for young people who had places in March to July last year, they should equally be offered them again. And where schools are offering home learning, that they should enhance their offer. So just to say that the school closure related to all schools, primaries, juniors, middle, secondary schools, and colleges. Interestingly, this time, the government said that early years settings should remain open, which was actually, in my experience, of the opposite last time. Last time, many of the early years settings closed and didn't offer places to key critical workers and vulnerable children because they were not included in the same guidance the government issued. And many of them are small church-run or community-run projects. So they just felt that they didn't have the systems and the staffing in place to run. So my experience of the March to July closure was that most of the early years settings were closed for longer. But this time, children in families where the children are not allowed to go to school, or the schools are closed, or they're not taking up the vulnerable child or place, are actually going to nurseries and preschools. I wonder about that, I suppose, because very small children are less likely to manage their self-care needs. You know, there's going to be more bodily fluids and more self-care needed, or adults providing that care for the children. But I think the support has come in families where the very small children, the very young children, if they miss protracted time out of education, could just never catch up. You know, the growth between a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, the children who will be starting school in September, very much need that input now, and it can't wait. And they certainly can't get it delivered remotely. So that's been an interesting change. Special schools have been asked to remain open. And again, special schools and local authorities have shared with me that that's been a challenge because depending on the nature of the specialist setting, some special schools find it really difficult to maintain distances, to maintain not having the self-care needs become a challenge and threaten safety of staff. You know, of course, some young people may need quite a lot of physical support, but also some young people with emotional needs may actually find the challenging circumstances we are in really, really difficult, and need and that be a trigger for their behaviour. So some young people may find that just being in the environment during this time can be a trigger for their trauma, particularly when we've got staff wearing PPE. I always find it shocking, although I realise it's there for very good reasons, when I see teachers on Teams meetings and they're wearing, you know, visors and aprons and gloves. And of course, that's there for a good reason. But of course, it can be a trauma trigger for some of our young people, as can wearing face masks. It can make them feel stifled if they're having to wear them, but it also can make communication challenging because young people can't lip read. Young people, particularly young people living with autism who have experienced domestic violence, research shows that that can be really overwhelming for them to have a part of somebody's face obscured. So it's great that the special schools have been asked to open, but it doesn't mean that's without challenge for the schools themselves. And again, with alternative provisions, I talked about alternative provisions earlier, if you're not sure what they are, but they are often the stopgap for young people, you know, when they're going through a transitional time in education where maybe they can't be in a school for whatever reasons. They're going to be going through some challenges of their own. So these alternative provisions are great for young people to offer support to, but actually the young people that need to access them are the most vulnerable. And of course, that's a challenge for some of the staff. The great outcome is when they're outside, and so it's much easier for social distancing. So just to say that the government has asked schools to up their offer. Last time when schools closed between March and July, we may have seen very little offered. It was very variable, actually. Most of the secondary schools had the structures in place to deliver lessons through a portal, or at least some live, but very few primary schools were at that stage. And a lot of the home learning was lots and lots of links, and I know that I have a concern around very small children learning that way, having to sit in front of computers. Young minds research will show us having to sit in front of a screen for long periods of the time. It is not great for young people's emotional well-being, their cognitive development, as well as it's not the most joyful way for small children to learn. However, this school closure period, schools will be judged on it in the next round of Ofsted, and we are seeing the government saying to schools that they would like them to improve their offer. They will be judged on it later on. So we're seeing a lot more primary schools offering live lessons. Great, because that's very, very close, a little bit like the Oak National Academy. We saw very, very close for the child being in the class, and children are adapting so well to this. But at the same time, they are having to spend long periods of the day sitting down in front of a screen. I do think months of that there will be impact for young people who have conditions such as ADHD, or young people who can become obsessed then with screen time, because it's very hard to say we can sit in front of the screen and do your schoolwork all day, but actually I want to limit your time, doing something you want to do on the screen. So I just want to be really open the fact that yes, these decisions are made for the best reasons, that we have to follow government advice. Absolutely. It doesn't mean it is without challenge for yourselves as carers. Staff are equally finding it a difficult time when they're trying to homeschool themselves. So we're all in maybe a different boats, but we're on the same sea, and it is a really challenging place to be right now. So schools are being urged to provide, primary schools around 2 hours work outside of these live lessons, and secondary schools around 4 hours. Many young people in secondary schools are able to work with a great deal of independence. The challenges you may face as carers is it's hard to check up if they're doing everything they should be doing until you get that email from the school that's saying, well, they haven't submitted something they should. And with primary age children, they're going to be very reliant on yourselves as carers to be sat next to them, to be supporting them with their learning, gathering their resources. So that's where we're at right now with the school government's advice and the school closure. The link on the screen is you can go and read the updated information yourself. I must say I'm having to spend a lot of time on government websites at the moment, having to make sure I'm staying up to date with the government advice. Local authorities will also issue some of their own guidance. So we could see that changing in the weeks and months to come, such as where children are in schools, they're being asked to wear masks. I've seen things written such as, 1-layer masks will not be considered adequate anymore, and they want them to go into 3-layer masks. Some schools want children to take their own equipment in and provide their own hand sanitizers. Some schools absolutely banning that and saying, no, they must use their own hand sanitizers, because particularly with young children, because if it gets in their eyes, it can, or ingested, it can cause a problem. And they want to provide the equipment themselves so they can sanitize it. Really hard things, such as I know when the schools open in September, such as reading books not always coming home in the physical sense. For me, I don't think it's as joyful to read a book with a small child on a screen, or books having to be quarantined. So we are living in really strange times when a reading book can be seen as, a threat because it could carry the virus. But it's right that we're cautious, and it's right that we're mindful to keep ourselves, our families, and of course our young people safe. So the government did come out and say, so this last time Boris Johnson said, which is quite a helpful phrase to say in the March closure, any child with a social worker. All of our young people have a social worker here at TACT. So that was quite clear cut. this time it was far more ambiguous. He talked about vulnerable children, but we weren't clear who those vulnerable children were. And in the early hours after the announcement, many of the local authorities were contacting me to say that they would class a vulnerable child as somebody that was actually unsafe at home, so their lives would be threatened for them being in the home. And by the virtue of living with a professional carer, our young people were not in that category. And that was a bit of a challenge because we were having to think about more carers having children at home, if that was the stance. But then there was updates, and eventually the list of vulnerable children and young people was published, and that made it a little bit more clear cut. So I'm sharing that with you now because, and it's also been shared with all the supervisors and social workers, child resource workers, and area and deputy managers. So everyone's really clear who's on that list, and it refers to our children as looked after children, a phrase that often used to be used for children in care. And all of our children are looked after to a local authority. Therefore, they're all entitled to a vulnerable child's place. Please contact the Education Service, and I know many of you have. If you approach the school and they absolutely try to say that your child is not on the list, because they are, very small number of schools, but some, particularly if they're struggling with staffing issues themselves. You may have seen in the media about teaching unions advising teachers not to go into school if they don't feel safe. And so some schools are really struggling to get enough staff in the school. So there has been a bit of kickback, a bit of push to say, that if you're at home, if there's a carer at home, or if the young person is safe at home, they shouldn't go to school. But actually, since the list, we can go back to the government website, and the government website is not putting a caveat on that. They're saying anyone who's looked after. They don't go into the situation, and really we wouldn't want schools to be challenging you on that. So if you have a challenge where you want the young person to be in school and take up the vulnerable child place and the school isn't cooperating, please contact us. Sometimes it's as simple as, and it has been, and it's happened to me in Scotland this week as well as in England, where it's just been a very simple phone call to the school, and then the carers offered the place. Sometimes it's a little bit more. I can think of some parts of England where the supervisor and social worker has taken the advice I've offered and negotiated with the local authority social worker, where, maybe the carer in this instance hadn't wanted to send the child to school and the local authority wanted them to. We usually have local authorities who their policy is the opposite. And we've just had to negotiate. It doesn't really matter what your decision is, because we trust that you're making it for the best interests of yourselves, the young person, and your families, whether you feel that the child very much should be in school or whether you feel that they shouldn't be and you'd like to keep them at home. But it is important that local authorities hear your point of view. We support you in advocating and asserting your point of view, and that we get the right outcome. And that's the right outcome for the young person, but of course the family in which they're living, because your personal circumstances, who's at risk, and whether it's going to be very supportive to have them in school, because sometimes we can see it putting huge strain on foster placements, or whether you feel more comfortable to have them at home. And again, if they were forced to go to school when you didn't feel comfortable, that again would cause stress and pressure at a really difficult time. So the top point talks about looked after children needing or being able to access a vulnerable child place. And the second is children with an education healthcare plan. And there is a distinct number of our young people who have additional needs. If you look through, it also talks about young people being NEET. So that can be some of our older young people who are not in education or employment or at risk of being so, young carers, care leavers. But as I say, there's no ambiguity on it now. all children in care are entitled to a vulnerable child place in school. And really it's down to the school to make that provision. And we're seeing the offer is really variable and really different. So some schools are offering childcare only, and unfortunately we can't challenge that. So some young people may be going to school and not receiving education. Some schools have set up that only support staff are in physically in the school, and teachers are working from home to deliver the lessons. And some schools are offering lessons to the children who are in school, and it's very high quality support. So there is feedback I'm getting from different areas. It's very variable between each school, the size of the school, the makeup of the school, whether it's an academy, whether it's a very independent village school, what parts of the country we're in, and the challenge of that part of the country in terms of COVID. So I know previously the north of England were hit so hard with COVID cases, but the feedback I'm getting now is that it really is the London boroughs who are struggling at this time. So where previously the how that affected us at TACT, within our TACT community, was fairly low numbers of COVID cases previously, and we're seeing very high numbers of cases now. So with that in mind, we need to meet carers where you're at, to think what's going to be best for yourselves and the young person and your families, for them to take up that vulnerable child place or to engage in home learning. And where they are engaging in home learning, we want to make sure that you have everything in place in order to deliver that. So I haven't had any questions coming in yet, but I'll plough on with the information that I'd like to share with you. And of course, this will be recorded, and it will be on the foster care portal for yourselves to refer to at a later date. So critical workers, as a foster carer, the fact that you have a child in care, you don't need to prove you're eligible for any other reason. But foster carers, critical workers such as social workers are also on the list, if you like, of people who can take up the place, because it's not just children care that will be in schools. It will also be the birth children of people on front line, emergency services, lots more have been added to the list about workers that society cannot function without, and therefore they can take up a place in school. And I've seen many emails of schools saying, you know, to try to reduce the numbers, to ask people just to take up a place when they're physically working, or if one member of the household is at home and the young person can be at home safely. But for the purpose of this, we're really very much sticking to the fact that the children are looked after and therefore eligible for a place. And again, you know, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as it was asked, well, if you had children in March to July, please offer them a place. Carers found that much easier, because you started then to just get emails and calls with the young people being offered a place without you directly having to ask. If you had declined the place in March to July and you'd now like to take it up, or vice versa, please also, again, engage with your supervisor and social worker, engage with the education service, let me know, because it doesn't mean that you have to stick with that initial decision. We have had carers look at the rates in their area or changes that may have occurred in their families, and then decide that the opposite is right for them this time. And that equally is absolutely okay. Of course, there's going to be people in your family who may be vulnerable. There'll be periods of time where the children are having to self-isolate as well. So even when the schools went back in September, some parts of the country, and I really feel for sort of some carers who explained that they may have had 4 young people in placement at 3 different schools, and it was a revolving door about who was isolating at what time. Sometimes the guidance was hard to understand, that if there's been a positive case, the child in that class, in that bubble, the child would have to, the particular child who shared that class bubble would have to isolate, but not members of the household. So therefore we were having difficult scenarios of carers having to drop children off at school, but the child who was isolating was not allowed in the car at that time, and really complex scenarios. And we're not saying this is easy for schools, absolutely not. When teachers and head teachers go into the profession, nobody absolutely thought about they would have to be managing some of the things they're having to manage now, such as, you know, PPE, keeping things sanitized, isolating, and many of the policies that schools are putting in place, and not because they want to, it's because the government are advising them to, or the local authority that the school's situated in is issuing quite strong policies and advice. And that's really challenging for carers who have children in placement in many different schools, or from many different local authorities. They could even attend the same school, but be looked after to different authorities, who all have their own interpretation of the guidance and their own priorities about what they think is right for the young people. But I do believe that in every circumstance that we can advocate for you, we can get your voice heard and come up with an appropriate solution for yourselves and the young person. So again, there's some links to some of the guidance that's available. I'd also say that if you're interested, it may be useful for you to check the websites of your local authority that you reside in, as well as the local authority your young person's looked after to, because you may find the guidance differs somewhat from different LAs. Okay, so we're about 40 minutes in. I think this is all new to all of us, so we haven't had any questions yet. But just to say that I really hope that this is proving useful to anybody who's watching it either live, or anybody who chooses to watch it as a recording later on, just to be a source of information for you and hopefully some support as well. So I'm going to move on to now we're really clear on what the government and local authorities are saying about how we can offer some support and advice to you as carers if you're supporting home learning. Because even if children are taking up their vulnerable child place, it may not be full-time, maybe part-time, and so you may have to supplement that with some home learning. Some of the young people may only be accessing childcare only, so you may have to be recapping some home learning when you get home. And for some young people, they're not attending school at all, and so home learning is carers are now taking on for the majority of young people's days. So we all know, so I know you're all in different scenarios, but I think home learning is going to touch most households in one shape or form. Even if the child has the vulnerable child place and they're isolating for 10 days, you wouldn't want them to miss 10 days of learning. We know our young people are often more likely to enter the care system behind, and our aim is to help them catch up as far as possible. So anything you can do to support home learning is really beneficial. So I produced quite a lot of guidance and documentation and some webinars as well around home learning. I just want to really drive home some of these key points, because I don't think they change. I don't think they really change in or out of school closure time, because appropriate support for young people remains the same. But while the schools are asking you to promote home learning, and it may feel like you're having to act as carer and teacher, but really the schools are meant to be the ones overseeing the young person's education. They're meant to be planning the work and marking it. And it really is, if you've got young people who are in primary schools or who have additional needs but aren't in a specialist setting, that you're offering support, advice, you're sitting alongside them, you're helping them to be organised. Doesn't benefit any young person to tell them the answer. And I think it's really important that teachers know if a young person is struggling with the work, that would mean it's not pitched appropriately, and they would have to look back at that themselves and review that when they assess the young person. And if they're a secondary school or college, because I need to talk about college age young people as well, that mostly it will just be, that friendly encouragement, making sure they have a suitable home learning environment, again, that they have access to appropriate equipment. We don't want young people accessing learning from their phones. They should be an appropriate device, and if you haven't got one, please flag that up either directly with the education service or with your supervisors and social workers who can make a request. And many virtual schools have been very generous in providing laptops for young people who need them. So we want to make sure that you're clear that, alongside your other commitments, you're asked to support home learning, but that it actually should be exactly that. You're supporting home learning. You're not having to plan work for young people. You're not having to, clash with them about completing the work. And you very much feel that you are delivering what the school is planning in terms of ensuring that they're in front of the computer at the right time, or they have the right snacks, that you're not having to act as that teacher, but more of a coach and somebody overseeing the work that's already in place. It's really important that your role as carer comes first. So the young person needs to know that you're there to care and support them, and really urge that it isn't a source of conflict. It very easily can be when a young person's got work they need to complete and they're resistant to it, but actually they will look to you to be their carer and their supporting adult long after they go back to school. And so we wouldn't want relationships to be damaged in any way, and we wouldn't want young people to feel that that they've school is in their home, because home learning should feel different to being in school. Should be more relaxed. It should be structured and offer opportunities for them to learn, but it shouldn't be that they're being sanctioned for not completing their work, because actually that's something the schools need to pick up and be interested with the young person to say, why is this a challenge for you? Absolutely. Should we be promoting it? Yes. Should we be reminding them the lessons taking place? Yes. And should we be, waking them up from their beds if they're older students and making sure they've eaten before they sit in front of the screen? Yes. But the conflict of, well, if you don't do your lesson, this is going to happen. We'd really want to avoid that, because it is about preserving placements, and it is about preserving loving, supporting relationships. All parents and carers have to sometimes challenge young people around education, but actually we don't want it to be a source of conflict, because we're going to be in this situation for many weeks, if not months to come, and we all need to get through it. So we need to get through it with a level of sense of humour, some sanity and camaraderie. And if it's just constant arguments all day, every day, the young person's probably not going to get much out of the learning that they do, because if it's under duress, and they need to see the point in it for themselves. So the best thing you can do is be that consistent source of support, of guidance, and just drive home that very loving, supporting, nurturing messages about how education is important, and you're there to support them. I said this before, it was an incredible time. I've got a small child, and it was an incredible time in our lives, and something that we look back on the photographs and the things we did and all the lovely nature walks we took last spring and summer as a really precious time in our lives. And I have actually equally heard carers share with me the massive progress some young people have made academically, emotionally, the fact that the lack of challenge of school has actually made them happier young people, and life has become a lot better for you. So we can focus on a lot that this is a challenging time. I think it's important too that carers will be under more stress, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. We wouldn't want that to go unsaid. But actually, for some households, this is a memorable, joyful time that's going to be treasured for many years to come. So the positives I've heard from areas, either from staff or from carers themselves, have been that so many young people have been relieved to be free of that daily pressure. So for some young people in secondary schools, it can be the social pressure, the pressure to have to rotate around a large school, deal with so many different authority figures, the fact that the teachers may not know them that well. And we know that it isn't the best model for children who have experienced trauma and children with attachment needs, having to build so many different relationships that they have to in secondary schools. And again, more bullying issues or social pressures can be available, can present themselves within a secondary school, and with social media so readily available, it often means that if they are being targeted or bullied, it doesn't stop at the end of the school day. It can be happening on their phone, and it's enormous pressure for many of them, even if it's just things like, I think it can be minimized in the media about filterers on the pictures or body images, or who's the top dog or who's got the most likes. I think we learn to live with these things, but they're incredible pressure for our young people to be negotiating on a day-to-day basis. So the fact that they're in their joggers all day and they're in their bedroom and they can plug themselves into their music, or just being home and have familiar food and all those home comforts. Some young people are really flourishing during this time of not attending school, because it can present as a constant challenge emotionally and socially. Yourselves, you might find that not having that rush out in the morning, that school run and picking them up at the end of the day and everything being on that tight schedule, you might find that you enjoy that as well. And as a family, you're able to relax into life a little bit. I think last week probably was a shock for everyone, but I know myself, I'm finding this week a little bit less of a challenge. That there are little things we can enjoy. I'm making sure I've got nice fresh flowers at home, and different things for lunch. I'm always making sandwiches, so we're having maybe some cooked meals at lunchtime, and just, although sticking very much to that structure, I very much urge carers not to have things like the TV on during the school day, so you've got that signal that it's a learning time. But actually, a young person not having to wear uniform, being able to wear very comfortable clothes. Some young people with autism find just the seams and the starchiness of school uniform. Many of our young people have sensory needs, so even just the tags in their school uniform, those horrible itchy blazers, can present as a challenge. So it's all those little things that many of you may be living a slower pace of life. The challenge this time around is it's quite gloomy and dark out there and cold in many parts of the country. But it is important to wrap up warm and to have those little breaks. I need to remind myself to do it every day and just see what's out there, enjoy nature. But it was very different, wasn't it, during the spring and summer of last year, where we had that glorious weather, and it was just lovely to get out for those little chunks of time that we were allowed to for our daily exercise. But what is to be celebrated enormously is the fact that during the last school closure period, many young people benefited so much from the one-to-one support that carers were able to provide, and not just directly the carers they're placed with. We saw that, extended family members, adult children were also getting involved and helping to teach the young person, maybe sharing their skills. We had some adult children maybe at university who are very happy to act as tutors and coaches to other young people in placement. And so I've heard so many very heartwarming stories about how the school closure period last time was really positive, and there's nothing to say that couldn't happen again. The negatives are very much there. The loss of routine for some young people is enormous. Particularly, many of children in care thrive on routine. Many young people with social communication needs need that. And just the fact they're not getting up and going to school anymore is huge for many young people. Many young people becoming fearful of the world. So where our young people have experienced a huge degree of trauma, that can trigger those trauma, it can bring back that feeling of doom. Even the most upbeat of us are living under gloomy times. There is an oppression. There is an air, the restrictions cause of life. This isn't our usual life. We have to think before we go to the supermarket, make sure we've got our mask and how to sanitize our hands. And as much as they're for very, very good reasons, it isn't carefree life as we once knew it. So that can be incredibly triggering for our young people. Things like loss of contact with the outside world, with people that are important to them, with support structures that exist within their school, be it their best friend or their peers or the form tutor. For many young people, school's been the consistent, and it's something that's incredibly important to them, and they really will grieve that loss of routine and support networks. So then you as carers and your families are having to compensate for that lack of social interaction as well, and sometimes take the brunt of their feelings around that as well. And we realise that's a really challenging place to be for all of you, for the young person, but as well as yourselves caring for them. Dip in motivation is probably the largest reported issues to me, where young people just don't want to work at home. There are some young people that keep home and school very, very separate. It's how they operate. It works well for them. So even outside of COVID times, we have some young people that really struggle with homework, and where we often can get schools facilitate the fact they do the homework maybe before they go home, where children are home learning now. That's really hard for them. They're having to bring the challenges of school into their very safe place, which is home. And some young people are not wanting to complete the work that's set, which again is a huge challenge for yourselves as carers. Mental health issues statistically, nationally, are on the rise during this time. That includes self-harm or feeling low in mood, that feeling of, well, I haven't got to get up and dressed and washed to go anywhere, so what's the point? And is this ever going to end? Because as much as adults we can see the bigger picture, young people sometimes are just grieving what they've lost in the here and now. And self-esteem. For some young people, it's just that dip in self-worth. It may take them back to a bad time in their life where their birth families were struggling and not able to go outside and interact in a positive way in society. And of course, we all worry about children falling behind. So it's really important that some home learning is promoted, but the emphasis on who should lead that is very much the schools. So we're just getting through the last few slides now, and we're reaching almost an hour. So I really hope that you found this useful and informative. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what you can do to hopefully help promote home learning and support your young person. So in schools, and I've worked in many different schools for a very long time, young people do not work every minute of the day. Okay, so for the first 20 to 30 minutes, where after you've dropped them off at school, they've entered, they're often milling around, greeting each other if it's a secondary school setting, or even in primary schools, they may have a sort of a go-to activity that's something low level like jigsaws or colouring. So you could provide that equally at home. But young people do not actively learn for every second of the day. So therefore, please do not put yourself under the pressure of thinking between 9 and 3 or whatever the young person's school day looks like. They need to be learning every second of that day, because it's impossible. Nobody could stay focused for that long without creating a huge amount of pressure on themselves, and you won't be able to facilitate that, because life happens. We all need to eat and have breaks and take phone calls and read emails. So my big take-home message is that there is focused periods of the day. So for a primary school child, I say that 10 minutes a day on phonics is going to be really important. If carers are telling me that they're still completing phonics with a young person an hour later because they're resistant, I'd say give up, stop. It's obviously not working for them that day, and you change it. And so it could be at bath time where they're building words with sponge letters. You can buy them from supermarkets very cheaply nowadays. Or, you get the big chalk and you go outside and do some writing that way. Writing for a purpose, such as, help me make a shopping list, or even do the online order. Approaching a can-do approach is going to be so much more beneficial than expecting young people to be tied to desks all day. And where schools are setting work, it's absolutely acceptable for you as a carer to just email the school and say, I did everything to support them to complete this task. They just were unable to. Whether it's from an academic point of view, of course, young people in care often lack the resilience to take risks in their work, or if it's an emotional block of, this is just too hard for me today. But I think it's really acceptable for you as a carer, just communicate with the school, let them know the young person's tried it and where they're at with their learning that day. So you want to create a learning environment. I think having the TV blaring on in the background is going to be a distraction for anyone, isn't it? Or where a young person may, in their break, want to go on a PlayStation. That's probably not the most conducive environment for learning. But where young people often have their own internal triggers, it doesn't have to be silence. Schools nowadays rarely work in silence, and young people sometimes work better with a little bit of music on in the background, or being able to get up and have a little break in between. So we want to make sure that their leisure activities are very kept for the evening. I think everyone's going to look forward to, well, it's 3:30 or 5 o'clock or whatever your deadline is, we can put the telly on and I can relax now. But at the same time, there is learning that can occur in the day that's incidental learning. So I think it's really great to have a busy box, a box of puzzles and Lego and Play-Doh and colouring. And I may say that primary school children like this. Actually, I've come across a lot of secondary school children who just have missed out on that, building blocks for learning, and their trauma becomes a block. So these are very grounding activities for them. So you want to set boundaries, but you also want them to have the opportunity to have some fun. So lots of us are cooking more at home and baking, aren't we, than we ever have done before during this closure period. They could write their own diary, go on a walk and read the road signs. I've done a lot of work with my little girl looking at odds and evens through door numbers. So please make sure you're not keeping yourselves restricted by just thinking that learning is desk-based learning. So we're approaching the hour now. I'm going to skip through the last few slides and just reiterate the take-home messages. So yeah, just everything I've said before. We may be learning from apps. We may be learning on portals. You may be asked to take photographs of the children's work and send it in. But the school is meant to provide the work. You're there to facilitate it. Children may have live reading sessions where the teachers are reading to them over the day, which is quite nice for maintaining that relationship. Or they may be recorded on lots of the schools have got their own YouTube channels now. And for secondary age pupils, a lot of it is going to be that independent, self-motivated learning. We know the government's going to change the exams this year. I'm hearing that the mocks in February, as well as teacher assessment, is going to contribute towards the grades. But I'll update you as we've got more concrete information on that government guidance. So we've been together for an hour now, so I won't keep you much longer. So I'm just going to say, take-home messages, consistency. Okay, make in this changing world, make the routines, home routines around home learning as consistent as possible. And you try to be, because if you're stressed, then obviously that's going to impact on home learning with the young person. So just try to create routines that work for you as a family, and that's balancing up all the family's different needs and requirements. Boundaries, such as you can't have your phone next to you while you're doing your work. That's not going to help you, but you absolutely can have it in the evening. The same sort of boundaries that schools would put in place and you would put in place just in your usual home. But opportunities, children jumping on a trampoline and counting is an opportunity for learning. It doesn't just have to be something that's in a book or on a laptop. The unconditional positive regard. We're not all going to get on it all day, every day, are we? We're going to have fallings out. We may not like each other's behaviour, but we always like each other. So the young person knows that they're always loved, they're always regarded positively, they're always cared for, even if it hasn't been a great day. Because there's always tomorrow, isn't there? And there's always next week to turn over that new leaf. And I think if the young person feels they're in a positive support environment and they try to understand the worth in the learning themselves, but avoid conflict, please. We don't want young people being shouted at, sent to their room, being told that, you'll be up all night doing this work if that's what it takes, because all of this conflict is counterproductive in the long term. It's providing the opportunity for the young person to learn. Some are going to take that opportunity, and for others, schools sometimes it's a challenge to get them to work. So it's going to be with carers as well. And we need to meet young people where they're at. So absolutely, the expectation is they work, but we don't want it to put undue stress on yourselves at home and cause, it to escalate and there be a major incident because of it. And remember to engage in learning activities that are more holistic, like I say, the cooking, or there's loads of yoga or Joe Wicks or whatever online. It's because all of this kinesthetic learning, getting up and moving, is going to be so important right now. But I know I get a bad neck, and I'm sure you probably get a bad back for sitting at the computers all the time. And children are going to be the same. They're going to be having headaches and feeling really tired and drained. So monitor emotional well-being, try to promote independent learning and in a fun way, because the big message I've had from schools to say that it's great we're young people having, an adult at their elbow. But when they do ultimately go back to school, they're going to have to cope in a class of probably 30 or more with maybe in a primary school teacher and teaching assistant, and in a secondary school, even less than that. So we don't want to teach our young people dependency. We want to encourage them to be as independent as possible. I believe the learning should be joyful. I believe that learning should be something that we enjoy. But, sometimes it is about being realistic in our expectations of ourselves as well as of our young person. They may not be able to complete everything the school sets them. Okay, I think I have a few more slides, but as I say, it's been, quite an interesting time for me. I don't mind at all the fact we haven't had any questions come up. I think this is quite a new way of us interacting. It would be great to get some feedback about if this has been a useful exercise and useful recording. If there's anything I can add to it that I've missed out, try to cover things in quite a broad sense. And many of you may want to discuss your young person's situation and needs on a one-to-one basis. So please, you see there, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, please email me, a.savage@tactcare.org.uk. And my phone number's there, so you can all equally ring on my work mobile. You can talk to your supervisor and social worker to raise any education issues. And I'm going to say thank you for your time. I hope this has been useful. Please take care during these challenging times. Stay safe, and just know you're doing a great job just by providing the young person with the home, providing them with the opportunities to learn, and being that loving, supportive, consistent figure. And well done to our young people, because most of them are doing an amazing job learning at home, coping with these changing times, going in school, even when it looks really different to how it used to be. And let's just hope that sooner rather than later, all the schools and colleges can reopen. Thank you. Bye-bye.